All right, so I was doing some thinking the other day, right, about Michael Porter Jr. And if you look at him as a player, very underappreciated, I think, by a lot of people in the media. He is one of the five best shooters in the NBA. And if a guy named Steph Curry wasn't playing right now, we'd be putting him in like best shooter in the league types of conversations. He's absolutely lethal from downtown at 6'10". So knowing that he's 6'10", I'm kind of thinking there has to be a world where sometime down the road he looks to become like the best player, like a top offensive option, like a 1A or 1B type of guy on a team, right? Like there has to be that type of situation for him in the future because I don't see him at 6'10" with that skill set that he has staying in like a catch and shoot role the entire way through. And he's 26, and we won't have those conversations about him being on another team unless for one he ends up going somewhere else in free agency, which won't be until like about like 3 years from now, or if something goes wrong here in Denver to where they want to trade him, which I completely doubt because he is way too valuable of an offensive option. But as I said, the question is there a world where MPJ is like an all-star first option sort of player? And if we look at him over the course of his career, starting back in high school, that's what he was projected to be. He was like the number one ranked player in the country. I remember he went over to Mizzou and the expectations were ridiculous. There were a ton of like nationally televised Mizzou games that year with the idea that he was going to be out there playing, but he had a significant back injury and that completely lowered his stock. And for some people, there was the question as to like whether or not he was going to become like this what if story, like this super highly touted player coming out of college or coming out of high school and never end up living up to the expectations. And if you look at his career now, it hasn't been what people have wanted it to be or thought it was going to be. If you looked at him in high school, you'd have thought by this point he would be like an all-star type of player, like an all-NBA type of player, but he's still been really good. As I said, he is an NBA champion, a major contributor on that NBA championship winning team, and is simply one of the most elite shooters in the NBA. But like I said, some people will say he didn't live up to expectations because of the fact that he never became that top offensive option sort of guy, right? And I don't think he'll ever become that here in Denver. That's just not the way that system operates, no matter what ends up happening. He'll be relegated to a catch and shoot role. Now, maybe there's a period of time where Jamal Murray is out for a significant number of games, God forbid, because they need him to win games and need him to contend for titles. And if there's a type of situation like that that comes up, he'll be able to seamlessly step into that role and be like a second option guy. We saw him do that a couple years ago when Murray got hurt. So he has that type of upside and potential. And that was kind of a time where I looked at Porter Jr. and I think it was around like 2021, 2022 when Murray was out and Michael Porter Jr. had like this insane offensive stretch. And that's when I started thinking, when does this guy get into a situation where he is leading his own team? Does that ever end up being the case? And he won't be till about 30 years old. I think he's 26 now. So he'll be like 29, 30 when his free agency ends up coming up. But that's still like his prime years, right? And I'm looking at him play, and I don't see a part of his game that's deeply affected by injuries because, as I said, he is still extremely effective as a player. So we shouldn't look at MPJ as this what if guy, right? We shouldn't look at him as a guy whose career got held back due to injuries because he's out here and he's playing and he's doing his thing at a very high level. He's just relegated to kind of a limited role on this Denver Nuggets team that works perfectly. As I said, they have a lot of value in him being out there as a catch and shoot option on the perimeter. But sometime down the road, I think he's got enough talent and enough skill to be like a top option. Because as I said, 6'10" with the ball handling ability he has, the shot creating ability he has, there aren't too many 6'10" guys right now that are kind of relegated to sitting out on the perimeter as catch and shoot options. Most of those guys are like looming around 6'6", 6'7". He has like NBA superstar, all NBA. He has that type of archetype. So as I said, looking at that and knowing that, you'd have to think that at some point down the road, he can end up being a number one option. Here are the things that he'll need, though, to be effective within that role, because I say this a lot. There are players who could be number one options, but are they optimized number one options? So, for example, Bradley Beal in Washington. 2 seasons as a 30-point per game scorer, and he was in elite territory. There's like a rare set of players who were able to average 30 points per game in back-to-back seasons, but was he optimized as a number one option? Was that where he was best used as, like Paul George, right? He had a time in Indy where that was the case, but if you're looking at him at this point in that stage in his career, he could be a number one option on a team, but is that team going to be a winner? Is that team going to be a contender? Jason Tatum, same conversation. He is a great player and a guy who can be a number one option on his team, but can he lead a team to a championship? Can he be optimized within that number one option sort of role. So that's the question. Some guys can be number one options, but is that where they're best used at? So for MPJ, in order for him to be best used as a number one option, there's one part in his game that he really has to flesh out. And again, I don't know how much we're going to see that here in Denver, and that is his playmaking. That's simply got to be a thing. There aren't too many players right now, especially perimeter-oriented guys, who are leading their teams while not having some versatility in their offensive game. MPJ is efficient, but he is still very much score first player, right? Like he is a score first player in every sense of the phrase. He's kind of known, there's that running joke where he's not going to swing the ball whenever he gets a look. He's shooting it. And I get it, as I said, if you're a catch and shoot guy at 6'10", you can shoot over just about anybody, right? And teams aren't going to want to go out there and put their big guys on him because he's that skilled. He can get past him and things like that. But he's kind of known for holding on to the ball. And if he wants to kind of fit within that number one option sort of role, playmaking and adding that aspect into his game is going to be huge. Let's go ahead and name guys who we look at right now as number one options on their teams. Luka Doncic, obviously elite level scorer, 30+ point per game type of guy. But as we all know, he is one of the best playmakers in the game. There's obviously Nikola Jokic, probably the best passer in the entire league. LeBron James, perfect example of that. Great duality between being an elite scorer and also one of the best playmakers in the entire league. Here's an underrated one, and I wanted to bring it up just as an excuse because I love talking about it and I don't feel like enough people pay attention to it. But Giannis is one of the most underrated passers and playmakers in the league. That is something he has in his game to kind of complement his scoring ability. So if MPJ wants to reach that level, he has to add that aspect to his game. Can he do that here in Denver? Can he give us enough reps to make us believe that he can be elite in that category or somewhat effective in that category? Probably not, as I said, because of that role he's in and what they're asking him to do. But if by like age 29, 30, if he wants to get there, which I believe he can, playmaking is going to be absolutely huge for him. But as far as the scoring, he has shown this ability to get to his spots pretty effectively. Now, can he do it with the shot volume of like a number one option? Obviously, the efficiency is going to go down. Shots are going to be more difficult. Like they're relatively easier now because he's playing off of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, which is one of the best two-man pairings the game has ever seen, in my opinion. Like if I'm just looking at the eye test, Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic are just about in sync as any other great point guard and big man pairing in NBA history, right? Like there's like the Stocktons and Malones and those types of duos. Like Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic aren't at that level yet, but they're kind of to that same effect where they're so dangerous playing off one another. MPJ is kind of playing off of them, right? So if he's like a top option sort of guy, he's not going to have that benefit of having the best playmaker in the game and Nikola Jokic kind of setting him up for looks and things like that. And the defense having to be worried about what those guys are doing on like one end, because usually they'll kind of have Porter Jr. playing on the opposite side of the ball while Murray on the other side playing like empty, ball screen, empty, pick and roll type of situation. So there is that. So again, if you look at Porter's raw skill set and his size, his archetype and things like that, it screams that of a future number one option sort of player, but there are still things and still ways he has to kind of fill out his game in order for him to reach that. But as I said, I want to see it happen, right? I don't want to see a guy like him, 6'10". It's great for the situation he's in now if he wants to continue to contend here with Denver. But at 6'10", with that skill set, as I said, there has to be at some point down the road in his career that he ends up becoming that sort of guy that people thought he was going to be in high school. And it's not over with, right? Like, as I said, there are some people who kind of talk about him as if he's like a what if story. Like, what if MPJ never got hurt? He's very effective right now. So there is still a lot of room for him to become like a perennial all-star type of player. And it'll be later on in his career, like starting off in that type of role at 30 is a little bit difficult, right? Your prime or your amount of time playing within that role is relatively short. You have probably about maybe 5-6 years at best of, optimizing yourself within that role. A lot of guys start to kind of dwindle like 36, 37. But still, as I said, there is that window of opportunity still for MPJ here, where a lot of people have you thinking that it's not going to be there at all, right? So we'll see what he ends up doing here. And again, I'm not trying to break him away from Denver, but as I said, at 6'10", I think there's got to be a world where he ends up becoming like an all-star caliber player. And I do think there's still an opportunity for him to live up to those expectations that people had for him when he was playing back in high school. And the good thing is also, if he ends up becoming that top option, he's taking championship winning experience into that type of situation. Paul George didn't have that luxury. Tracy McGrady didn't have the luxury when he went over to play for Orlando. Like, that's something that he does have, is a lot of deep playoff experience and actual championship experience as a top option or a big time option on a championship winning team. So we'll see what ends up happening here for MPJ. Again, this is super down the road. It only happens more immediately if there's like an issue between him and Denver to where they want to trade him, because, as I said, I don't see that happening anytime soon because he's way too valuable as a shooter, but we'll see. But I still think there's a world where MPJ still becomes like a superstar, borderline superstar type of player.